All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to ShakeTember 2021. This is the final week where we have read The Winter's Tale. I'm here with my two other hosts, Rainey from Rainy Day Reads and Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse. I may have already said this, but for this last week, we read The Winter's Tale. And funnily enough, the famous stage direction exit pursued by a bear is very appropriate for the, exiting play in a way for ShakeTember. But yeah, so we read The Winter's Tale, and I was hoping to have one of you start again. I can't remember which one of you started last week, but whichever of you wants to start first, give us your opening take. That would be cool.
I'll go ahead and go first, I suppose. I can't remember who went first last week either. So sorry if I'm sort of stepping on your toes there, Rainy.
I don't care.
So one of the things that struck me, and I think when we had decided on the plays and the order of the plays, I think it occurred to me then, but then I kind of forgot about it. And then when I started reading the play, it came back, popped back into my mind. I kind of think it's cool, actually, and serendipitous that our ShakeTember reading has been bookended by Othello and The Winter's Tale, because these plays have so much in common in that they are both about a jealous and irrationally jealous husband. In the first play, he kills his wife, and in this play, he thinks that his wife dies as a result of his kind of crazed behavior. And so I find that really, really interesting. And I don't remember, where Othello kind of appears. I know this play dates later than Othello. This was one of his final plays, but yeah, I'd be curious to see how early in Shakespeare's career Othello appeared. Just because, I feel like they're approaching a similar subject, and they're doing it in very, very different ways. I find, now granted, I think it happens too quickly. I'll get to my thoughts on that here in a moment. But I actually find Leontes' jealousy in this to be more believable, I suppose, than Othello's. I think that there's something to be said about or for how people, I don't know, man, when people think that they see something, when someone feels like they've kind of stumbled onto a truth or a reality, and maybe this explains conspiracy theories on some level as well, but yeah, they just allow their minds to kind of spin out of control, and everything becomes imbued with meaning. And it made me wonder how, if I were directing a stage production of this, how I would communicate that, right? I mean, so you would have Hermione and Polixenes on stage, kind of strolling around doing their thing, and it looks benign and is benign, but how do you communicate what's going on inside the mind of Leontes as he watches them? I mean, would I put a screen over the stage, and a little bit like that scene in the Harry Potter film? I think it's the second to last Harry Potter film, maybe, when they're trying to destroy the Horcrux, and I don't know, there's this vision, this smoky vision of Hermione, strangely, of Hermione, and Harry fooling around, and it's designed to make Ron freak out, right?
Yeah, okay.
So, I mean, maybe do something like that with a stage production on a screen above the stage. I don't know. So I thought that was, I don't know, I thought that was really interesting. And as far as how quickly Leontes makes the turn, because man, he turns on a dime in this thing. It makes me wonder if Shakespeare didn't intend this to be, or if he intended this to be more of a meditation on the condition of jealousy rather than an actual believable narrative story, right? So Othello's behavior, it feels more, because we have characters interacting with each other, it feels more believable in that sense. But the fact that Leontes is all in his head and it happens so quickly. It makes me wonder if Shakespeare is intending this not to be sort of believed as a narrative so much as a kind of investigation of what goes on in people's minds, and how, I don't know, how they allow themselves to descend into these irrational depths, I suppose. If that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was actually, well, I won't interject if you're not done. I'll let you go.
Go ahead.
First.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I saw that too as I was reading. I was like, oh, this is a lot like Othello as far as, you know, the jealousy thing. And I thought, I was trying to think too which one I liked better, because yeah, Leontes turns on a dime, and it's like, where did you even get that? You know, and I can kind of see, like, at first I thought, well, it's more believable that someone like Iago would plant that seed in his mind, and it's maybe a little bit more like rational to think that, you know, you hear something and that starts it off, and, you know, it kind of grows from there. But then when you said, you know, you're getting just more of the internal switch being flipped, that you just see, like, maybe she put her hand on his arm or something, and, you know, he obviously would think like, well, she shouldn't be touching another man, you know, and that's like all that it would take. And as far as it being believable, I don't know, like, in reality, would somebody go from 0 to 60 that that quickly with something like that? Probably not. But then that seems to be a trend in Shakespeare, that his characters go quickly from one extreme to the other. So, but yeah, I liked that we went, you know, unintentionally from something like Othello to something like A Winter's Tale, and could kind of compare and contrast them too. And this kind of, overall, this play is more to my liking, because it was still unbelievable. Like, the whole thing was just like, this would never happen. Like, none of these things would ever happen. And but yet it wasn't like a Midsummer Night's Dream where there were fairies running around, you know, and doing and changing people. And it was like real people, but getting like to almost fantastical situations. So I still kind of liked that it had that fantasy vibe to it, while still having like the sort of deep psychological themes of Othello. So yeah, I think that's why I like this one. And then I saw a production, I think I saw, and I have not been able to re-find what I saw originally, but I think it was a movie version of this, where I'm pretty sure it was like set in the 60s or the 70s or something. So I always have this vision of these women in go-go boots and stuff running around pretending to be statues and all this. So, so that adds a little bit of extra fantasy element for me.
Kelly and I actually have a ballet of it on DVD upstairs. I was going to bring it down and show it to you guys, but
yeah,
I forgot to. So
yeah, that'd be cool.
Have you watched it?
Yeah, it's gorgeous. It's really beautiful.
Cool.
Interesting. I don't watch enough ballet. I need to watch more ballet. I'll have to try to find that.
Well, it's hard to it's hard to just sit at home and watch a ballet, I find.
True.
Like, I feel like you need to sort of be in the theater to keep you invested. That's my thing anyway. Anyway, sorry, I don't want to get off topic and start talking about ballet.
That's too early in the show for that.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So I was thinking of Othello too, of course, and I was actually thinking for that first, you know, 1 or 2 acts where it's mostly about Leontes being crazy. I was actually thinking to myself, you know, it's actually unfortunate that Othello, the play, is seen as like Shakespeare's primary work on like jealousy on jealousy and you know and so on, because I actually think that with the way they Leontes, the way that his jealousy goes is actually a bit more realistic. You know, that a lot of times there is not all that much good reason for someone to start being jealous. You know, it just kind of happens. And a certain person with a certain personality will behave the way Leontes does. They just sort of have decided that that's what's going on, and they're not going to consider any you know, contradicting evidence. And you know, I think you could do things like what Jason said, or even you could do even less than that. And in the brief moments where Hermione and Polixenes interact, I mean, you could have the actor and actress be kind of flirty, you know. I mean, and because I mean, there are people in the world who just act flirty, like, you know, some people are just like that, and it doesn't really mean that much, but that's just how they are. And so maybe Hermione and or Polixenes are people like that, you know. And so you could easily have the actor and actress sort of give Leontes tiny little you know, strings to grab onto, and obviously that doesn't that wouldn't, I don't think, make how sort of vehement he is and everything justifiable by any means. I'm just saying it would be a sort of explanation. But it's a little bit like, yeah, actually Leontes's character, I think, is actually a little bit similar to Iago, just in the sense that, you know, his jealousy isn't explained that well, like Iago's hatred of Othello isn't explained that well. But, you know, like what Jason said about Iago, the point isn't necessarily that you need to know why he has this motivation. It's just, or that's part of what the point of it is. Or sorry, I'm not saying this well, but the point is to explore how jealousy progresses, less than exploring how it first occurs. Okay, so maybe a better comparison would be like Romeo and Juliet, right? Like, a lot of people make a big deal about how they fall in love at first sight, and some people think that's unbelievable. I really don't think that it matters to the story of Romeo and Juliet whether or not love at first sight is a real, quote unquote, real thing. I think what matters is just, well, they're in love now, so let's see how it goes, you know? Right. That's kind of what matters. It matters that, you know, Shakespeare needed the plot to start, so, you know, we got it started.
Right, it's only a 2-hour window of time. You can't.
Yeah. And so here, I think, again, he just needed the plot to get started, so let's just make Leontes crazy. Right. And I mean, I guess someone might see that as lazy, but I think storytellers do it all the time. And I find him interesting too, for the same reason that, like Jason said, about like conspiracy theorists. And I was thinking about people engaging in, you know, pandemic denial and such, which we don't need to go down that rabbit hole, but, you know, I was just thinking about them as well. And another thing that's interesting comparing this to the other plays we've read is, so my understanding is that that in terms of the lateness of the plays, the earliest play that we've read this year is Henry IV, Part 1. That's not like super early, I know, but it is like sort of mid Shakespeare. Whereas I think Othello is like, at least it's a Jacobean play, I know, so it's like in the second half, definitely, of his career. And then The Tempest is obviously like one of his latest, and then this is also late. So we've actually read a fair amount of like late-ish stuff this year. But what I think is interesting comparing this to the other plays we've read is that I think Othello, I think the other three are all in many ways very male dominated. You know, The Tempest has Miranda as a very interesting character, certainly, and Desdemona in Othello and Emilia in Othello, but they're very male dominated, right? Especially Henry IV, where it was like, there were, I think, maybe 3 scenes with a woman appearing, right? Yeah. And one of those scenes could easily be cut, and you wouldn't be doing violence to the play, really. No. And then Othello, you know, again, Desdemona is not one of Shakespeare's most, you know, prominent heroines, certainly. Emilia is interesting, but she's a smaller role. And then okay. And what's interesting is that we ended with this play that isn't exactly, I guess, is much more female dominated, you know, because like you have Paulina, who's a very assertive force in it. You obviously have Perdita.
Yeah.
Perdita. And obviously Hermione and the ending scene where it's interesting that the ending scene seems to be primarily about Hermione meeting her daughter for the first time. That last scene emphasizes the mother-daughter reunion more than the husband-wife reunion, which I think is pretty interesting. So it's interesting that we're ending with this play that is definitely much more female dominated than the other three that we've read. It's interesting because Shakespeare has a lot of plays with a lot of prominent female characters, but very few of his plays actually pass the Bechdel test, weirdly enough. And this is actually one of the ones that does pass the Bechdel test. So yeah, anyway.
Well, and the women's roles are so well written in this, right? I mean, that scene where Paulina first confronts Leontes about what he's doing, what he's thinking. I mean, God Almighty, she is like a gale force wind in that scene. She is a badass in that scene. Right? She's like a Marvel superhero or something. And it's just a joy to read, right? It's just a real joy to read a character, because so often in the plays, like, the women are placid, et cetera, et cetera. And she blows into that scene like a storm, man. It's it's a cool thing to witness. So
yeah. I think Paulina and Amelia from Othello are like probably my favorite female characters, maybe in Shakespeare, just because they're just so they don't take it. They're like, I don't care that I'm a woman. I'm gonna tell you that you're an idiot.
It is interesting though, because there is a character named Amelia in this play too, which
that's funny. Why I was like,
yeah, I think Hermione, and I think it's she's Hermione's like whatever handmaid or something. Which is just I thought was a funny coincidence, because obviously Amelia in Othello is also Desdemona's, whatever the position is called, her handmaid or whatever. It's no, Paulina is really cool. What I think is funny on a different level is that, like, almost half this play takes place in Bohemia. And there's talk of the coast of Bohemia, and my dad is actually from Bohemia, from the real Bohemia.
Oh, really?
Which is a landlocked region of a landlocked country.
Oh.
And and I posted a joking Facebook status the other day saying I'm a character from The Winter's Tale, and then Jason left a comment on the status asking me which one I was, and I said Apollo. As a joke, but in retrospect, what I should have said is the only authentic Czech character in Bohemia in this play. None of these characters have Czech names. None of them act like Czech. No. I mean, I guess they might act like Czech people, but none of them have Czech names. There was no coast in Bohemia. But that kind of plays with the kind of fantasy of it. Yeah,
I didn't even think about that, because my family is Slovakian, and that didn't even enter my head that was a real place in the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
Oh, it's funny.
One of the things that I appreciate, I won't say although I like it, I suppose, but I appreciate about The Winter's Tale in relation to Othello is I feel like it doesn't necessarily redeem the behavior of the irrational male characters in the play, but I love that it complicates things by Leontes is punished for 16 years. He is made to believe that he is a widower, and so there is punishment there, right? I mean, he is, he's held accountable for what he's done, but it's not final, right? I mean, there's Paulina makes sure that there's room for renewal at the end that she makes. There's always possibility. I mean, she has no idea if the daughter's ever going to reappear, but she's got Hermione kind of lying in wait for that to happen, and I find myself often when I read this play thinking about how Hermione spends those 16 years. How close must she have come to Paulina, right? I mean, like how deep did their friendship go? And so I think that's one of the things that's wonderful about it. Othello feels so severe, and it's like an axe, falling, and in this play there's I won't say magic necessarily, but it's a little bit like the Tempest, right? I mean, there's I don't know, there's the threat of something final and something kind of retributive. I don't know if that's a word, falling, but it seems like in his latter years, Shakespeare was just much more interested in seeing how punishment could be somehow balanced with redemption, somehow balanced with possibility and renewal. And I just find it, I really love The Winter's Tale, and of course you guys know The Tempest is my favorite. I just really love that attitude in these late plays. There's something really kind of light about it, right? I mean, they're at the end. Well, it's a little bit like in The Tempest, right? So we have multiple times in the play we have characters thinking they're seeing visions or something, right? And here at the end, right, when Hermione's a statue, and Paulina's telling everybody, oh no, don't touch her hand, don't kiss her lips, etc., etc. The paint is it's still fresh. But there's this sense that something is ephemeral, right? That if you touch it, it'll somehow break or shatter. And I really, really love that, because the tragedies, the true tragedies are just there's something so harsh and unforgiving about them. And with these late plays, they make like they're kind of gonna go there, but then they don't go there. And he reaches for something that just feels so light and so beautiful and so fragile, which I think is I don't know, it's just lovely.
Yeah, I think that's why I said that this is more my style of play than Othello, because he just keeps this a sense of hope in the whole thing, that it's not all doom and gloom and everybody's not going to die, and we're like there are some redemptive qualities to these characters, and like even if somebody had really died, and somebody did, right? The exit pursued by a bear guy. So,
and the son, the young son.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's right. The young son. Yeah. So, like people did actually die, and, sometimes horrible, painful, scary bear deaths. But yet you almost forget about that, obviously, because it's kind of like, I still have all this hope, and, things are still going to go on, and it's going to be nice. So.
The scary bear death, it makes you think of Grizzly Man, right? So the Werner Herzog documentary about Timothy Treadwell. I would love, because I love Werner Herzog's voice. I'd love to hear Werner Herzog narrate these lines about his death, and about the clown finding him and whatnot. I would love to hear Werner Herzog read those lines.
Or just have Werner Herzog read the stage directions out loud.
Yeah. Exit pursued by a bear.
What I do like about this play too is that similarly to what both of you have said, is how like a lot of the tragedies are just full of death and bleakness and whatever, and a lot of people die, or everyone dies at the end or something. And then a lot of the comedies, it's like the exact opposite. It's like, that was almost a tragedy, but it doesn't happen, so everyone's fine at the end. Whereas in this play, like Rainey said, people do actually die, like the young son. And one of the people who dies is like the young son, who's like the most innocent person probably to die in a lot of from across a lot of Shakespeare's body of work. And then obviously the what's his name, Antigonus, who
Oh yeah,
gets
Antigonus, yeah.
mauled and killed by a bear. And what I like about the play is that it ends well, but it still has death and grief in it. And something that I did find really kind of an interesting piece in it is, or at least a thought I had, when Hermione dies and Leontes suddenly is Hermione dies and then Mamilius, the son, dies very quickly as well. Leontes suddenly has this complete change of heart, and then is obviously sort of going through this penance for years. And what I thought was interesting about that was that, I think a lot of people, when they lose a loved one, do feel some amount of guilt, or at least not always guilt, but like some degree of loose ends not tied, which is something approaching guilt sometimes. And then some people do feel real guilt in certain cases. And I thought that the case of Leontes was kind of a look at that, at the fact that a lot of people do feel guilt when loved ones die, but like amped up times 100, because like he ostensibly caused the deaths, right? And there's quite clear correlation. And I thought that was really powerful. And I think Leontes can come off as just a really unsympathetic, ugly character, but I could see a really, really good subtle actor taking it and making it a sympathetic part, especially at that moment. And I thought that was interesting. And just more broadly, the kind of, the role that like grief and loss plays in this play. And again, I like that it's like a comedy, but it has some real, loss in it, where a lot of comedies don't, which is fine, obviously, but
yeah. For as fanciful as I feel like this play feels, it's actually probably the most realistic in terms of like having multiple emotions and like both the good and the bad happening and like still having the hopeful stuff, but also like causing the death of your kid, so yeah, it still feels kind of like Midsummer Night's Dream and The Tempest to me for some reason, but at the same time, it's like everything is really pretty realistic, except for how extreme Leontes gets. But
and the fact that Bohemia has a coast.
Oh yeah, that too.
But
So to your point, Lukash, what you're saying about Leontes' response to his son dying, that as soon as you said that, it put me in mind of a couple of other kind of different situations that we see crop up in the news or in people's lives, et cetera, how, where, even right now, right, and again, not going down the rabbit hole that you had mentioned earlier, but how these people, there'll be a family of people who don't get vaccinated, and then one of them gets sick with COVID and dies, and then when that happens, oftentimes we see the surviving family members say, we all made a mistake, everybody should, get the vaccine, et cetera. Or it's a little bit as well, like when a parent will have a child who's gay or lesbian, right? And the child comes out and the parent is not supportive, et cetera. And then in some cases the child will commit suicide or will be, ostracized and eventually die or something like this. And then the parent recognizes only at that point the role that their spurning of their child had in the child's emotional state and eventual decision. And then they're tormented by it for the rest of their life. They're haunted. And so it seems very much to be that kind of thing as well. When we get to the end of the play, it's not just the fact that he thinks his wife has been dead for 16 years. It's also the fact that he feels responsible for the death of his boy because of his allowing himself to kind of fall off the deep end there. And and we're left with characters who are, these people are damaged. Almost everybody at the end of this play is damaged in some way. I don't think we're at all meant to feel like Hermione and Leontes are just gonna slip right back into their old roles. Shakespeare, I mean, he doesn't give us any more beyond that final scene in Act 5, but I think he very much understands and wants his audience to understand that this isn't going to be easy for these people moving forward. They're going to have to learn how to fall in love with who they are now, and that might not be possible, you know. So it's weird, even though it does have this really beautiful, happy ending. It does feel very much kind of touched by the possibility of things not working out, you know, and it does seem to be very, again, I used the word earlier, fragile, that even the situation at the end, the resolution at the end feels tenuous. It feels like it might not happen. And that's that, again, that's another one of the really beautiful things about the play, because, you know, his plays tend to, I mean, the ends are the ends. And with this play, it feels in some ways like the end is a different kind of beginning. And I'd love to see what a sequel to The Winter's Tale could look like.
Yeah.
I wonder if a novelist out there has done that, actually.
I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to research that. So I'd like to see a situation where Leontes is like, you can still be a dad, but you're just gonna have to pay me alimony because there's no way we're getting back together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know, it's interesting to me that this play is not one of Shakespeare's like most famous plays, at least in the public. I think Shakespeare aficionados, I think, tend to really like it. Like, because the three of us like it. Harold Bloom, for example, liked it. Marjorie Garber likes it. Marjorie Garber actually ranks it as one of her favorite of all time of Shakespeare's plays. Favorite of all time, anyway. Favorite of Shakespeare's plays. People who love Shakespeare love it, but it's not super popular in the wider public. You know what I mean? It doesn't get taught in schools as much, and that might be for the best. Like we were talking the other week about what's good to teach high school students from among Shakespeare. This probably isn't a play for high school students any more than something like King Lear isn't something you would want to teach to high school students either. I think they're very mature things. In fact, I think this might be even more mature than King Lear because of kind of the things that we've been talking about. So I can't really imagine a high school student reading this and appreciating it. But anyway, this play is just not super popular. Like Rainey, I think you mentioned a film adaptation you saw, and like,
and I can't find it now. I can't find it now. I don't know.
Yeah, and it strikes me that, I mean, like I didn't even know that there was a film adaptation of this play. You know what I mean?
Well, was it a film, Rainey, or was it a film stage production?
See, and I can't. It was so long ago. I don't know if I'm just remembering it as like a movie, or if it was just kind of like a YouTube-y type. Somebody did it as a play, and I'm just remembering it like it was a scene from a movie. You know?
Because I can't think of any actual true cinematic adaptations of this.
Okay. Yeah, so that's probably what it was. It was probably just somebody put on a play and filmed it. And I'm just kind of like the Into the Woods with Bernadette Peters. They had a film adaptation of it, but it was just them doing the play. So it's probably something like that I just was so long ago. I just don't remember.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me that this is so not popular. Like, I mean, I was thinking about it last night, that this play is like Shakespeare doing a, slow moving independent art house movie, whereas like Othello was like a Bond movie or something, and so people who are cinephiles will like the independent art house slow going movie. And they probably also will like the Bond film, but the regular person will tend towards something like the Bond film. Yeah.
That's a good analogy. That's a good way to put it, I think. Yeah, I agree. I've always been puzzled because it's one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. I would say it's in my top 3. And I've always just been really puzzled why it hasn't been embraced more widely than it has. I think that final scene with Hermione essentially coming to life again is one of the greatest scenes in his whole body of work. And I just find it so lovely, and again, just so kind of light and deftly handled. It's just it seems like it should be sort of widely loved, this play, but for some reason it's not. I feel like I read an article a couple of years ago when I read The Winter's Tale for what was then ShakeTube, our event here, and I feel like the article was essentially communicating that it's becoming, I don't know, that it's becoming more popular in terms of how often it's staged anyway. I feel like the article said that there's some kind of renaissance in interest in The Winter's Tale, but I could be misremembering that. I'll see if I can find whatever it was that I read, but yeah, it's a really fine play, and it's got I don't know, it has wonder in it, and it has humor in it, and really complicated. Maybe that's part of what it is, Akash, right? Is that I feel like in movies and just in life, I feel like people tend to shun things that are complicated, emotions that are complicated. People tend to want to kind of turn their brains off, I think, in life, especially when they're encountering art. They just want to be entertained, and they just want to be able to zone out. And this is a movie. This is a play that doesn't really give us that luxury or that option. Everything that's going on in this play emotionally is really, really complex. And yeah.
And I think the language might be complicated at times too. I mean, my mom was going to try to read this play because I told her that this event was going on, and I told her that we all picked a different play. And when I told her that I picked The Winter's Tale, she said she would try to read The Winter's Tale. And she said that she got like a few pages in and she just didn't know what was going on. Now, my mom doesn't read very much Shakespeare, so that might be a major problem for her. But I found myself struggling with the language sometimes too. And what's interesting is that where I struggled with the language was actually in the Bohemia scenes, in the scenes that a lot of which were in prose, like just following like Autolycus, like his character, like I still feel like I have no clue what his whole deal was, because I just half the time didn't know what he was saying or what other people were saying to him. You know what I mean? And so I wonder if that's part of it too. Part of that is because the edition that I read it in was a Penguin Classic, and these editions are really nice, but they don't have any explanatory notes like on the page for you.
Oh, gotcha.
At times, which I kind of liked at times, but at other times I was like, yeah, I need that phrase explained. I don't know what that person is saying. And so that might be part of it too, that it is a particularly difficult play. And the verse sections I think are difficult too. I think maybe my brain is a bit better at processing Shakespearean verse than Shakespearean prose at times, because the verse parts I could see would be difficult for someone who's not doesn't have their Shakespeare muscle in shape.
No.
But the prose bits I did have trouble with. So that might be part of it too. I don't know.
I think there's so much.
Go ahead, Rainey.
I was just gonna say, and I think there's just so much going on in this play, which there isn't a lot of Shakespeare, but I think there's just so many parts to it that maybe that is another reason why people are just like overwhelmed by it, maybe. and they don't, and like I can see it being fun for like a school or something to put it on and do the exit pursued by a bear, but then also it would probably be very poorly done every time. So it's like I can see as a director thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to do this that I'm just not going to be laughed off of the stage, kind of a thing. But yeah, it would be fun to see.
So, Akash, you bringing up the poetry and the prose in this reminded me of one thing I wanted to mention. We've talked over the course of these videos at times about the function of this exchange being in verse, and the function of this exchange being in prose, and how oftentimes, right, something being in prose is an indication of the class of the character, something like this. And there was one thing I noticed in this play, and maybe I've seen it in other Shakespeare plays. I can't recall off the top of my head, but when we have that scene, I think it's the end of Act 1 with Camillo and Polixenes, and Camillo essentially, finally breaks down and tells Polixenes, here's what the king is going to have me do to you, right? You need to escape, blah, blah, blah. They're speaking in verse. And you get the sense that it's partly because, right, Camillo is respecting Polixenes' status as a king, and there's something, they don't know each other well, and there's something formal about them, right? I mean, if I remember right, Camillo is the one who like sets his place setting or whatever at the table. And then when 16 years have rolled by and they've been living in Bohemia together as friends after having fled, their first scene together, they're speaking in prose. And I felt like it was a really stylistically a beautiful way of communicating the change in their relationship. They're friends now. There's an easiness between them. And that's the only time I can remember in Shakespeare the pivot from poetry to prose indicating that, rather than something like, a lack of education or class or something like this, or kind of rusticity in a character. It seemed to indicate a greater intimacy between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I found that I actually had some difficulty. I found the Bohemia scenes more difficult to get into. I don't know what y'all's experience of that was, but I just had a hard time with the language, although usually I was able to like struggle through and get the idea. But I just didn't really get as much out of the characters as I did out of the Sicilian characters. So I guess I'm curious, with the exception, I guess, of being Florizel and Perdita. I really like their dynamic, they're interesting because something that was pointed out by Marjorie Garber in her chapter was that they're interesting because they're a young couple who are both very preoccupied with preserving their virtue and virginity and this sort of thing. And usually when there's a character who's preoccupied with the virginity and virtue of the young people, it's like a father figure or something. So it's interesting that we have these two young characters going on and on about chastity and all these things. So they were interesting, but a lot of the other characters in the Bohemia scenes I just had a hard time really connecting with. I didn't find the clown funny, although I found it interesting how usually when there's a character who's called Clown, they're usually very much a peripheral character, and it felt like he was one of the central characters because he was the shepherd's son. And so there was some interesting thing, but I just didn't find myself getting as much out of them. I found my attention wandering more than usual during my time reading those sections. So I was curious what y'all made of those.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I would have liked to have seen more of the Hermione and Paulina relationship during those 16 years than I really cared about Perdita. And I mean, I guess I would like to have seen that because then it would have made the ending, or it ended up, it was more poignant because you knew about Perdita and everything. But I think I just would have found that like kind of sisterly bond more interesting to read about. And I kind of felt like the shift was a little too abrupt, that like, okay, well, we're done with these characters now we got to go to this whole new thing that's happening. And then, of course it meshes at the end, but I just kind of maybe felt like it was a little too abrupt for me to really get into those characters after I'd spent the time with that other plot. So, but yeah, I mean, I just liked those characters better, I guess. Same with you. Yeah.
For me, I feel like the focus in this, it's weird, and it's hard to kind of apprehend it from the page itself. I think it would be much easier seeing a really good production done of it. But for me, I feel like the season, the pivot from winter to spring, I feel like the season is really the focus, right? The
Right.
season of rebirth and renewal is really the focus. And as far as, I don't know, like, I guess what the Bohemia scenes do for me is, I mean, with the characters of Florizel and Perdita, I really, when I look at how assertive they are, right? And Florizel's like, you know what? My dad's like, oh, you're not gonna marry this girl. And he's like, yeah, I'm gonna do whatever the hell I want. And what I love about that is that there seems to be this kind of vitality to them and to their decisions. And I think it stands in really sharp contrast to the brittleness or the coldness of how their parents have been at different times in the play. And I found myself actually thinking about, while reading this, and I don't remember ever having this be at the forefront of my mind. I mean, I could be wrong. I could watch an old video of mine and be like, oh, I talked about that before. But the play really had me thinking a lot about parenting and how bad the parents are in some ways in this play, and how they don't listen to their children. They don't take into account what their children want. And so much bad shit has happened with Polixenes, and he's forced to flee, and he loses his friendship with Leontes, et cetera, et cetera. And you want to believe that Polixenes is going to be a better parent, but no. I mean, there's still all this. There's so much about respectability and marrying within your station and all that jazz. And I feel like, the kids in the play, Florizel and Perdita, I feel like are the future, right? In more than just the literal sense that they're young and they're going to outlive their folks. But I feel like they are, if they were to grow up and, get married and have kids of their own, that they would not be the kinds of parents that their parents had been, right? This kind of calcified, my way or the highway, 1950s America, just hardline, hard-nosed parents, right? Like they seem more like kind of, I don't know, like young hippies or something, right? I mean, it's springtime, and like you can see them with flowers in their hair and stuff.
Go-go boots. That's where the go-go boots came in.
So instead of taking a boat to Sicilia, right? Maybe they hop in their VW van, and with flowers on the sides. But yeah, so there seems to me to be a kind of, I don't know, just I guess a shift in those characters in the Bohemia scenes, a shift away from the old way of doing things, the old way of parenting, the old way of looking at relationships and, cross class. Because I mean, Florizel, he has no idea that she's actually royalty. He has no idea he is completely committed to her. And I just think that there's something wonderful about that, and something kind of revolutionary and groundbreaking about it. So that's, I guess, what the Bohemia scenes did for me, is they kind of pushed my brain into looking at the play about a kind of changing of the guard, looking at the play as a changing of the guard, I suppose, between how this generation had done things and how this generation is going to do things moving forward. It's nice. I can see Florizel saying in the end, oh, it's nice that she's turned out to be royalty, but I didn't care about that. I genuinely didn't care about that. And I feel like that's a pretty rare thing, I suppose, even in the work of Shakespeare.
Yeah. So no, I like that. So my favorite passage in the play is something that Florizel says to Perdita. So I just thought, for the fun of it, I would read it. And actually what I liked about this passage was it reminded me of something that I read in The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. It reminded me of something that a young man, so the main character, Lily Bart, it reminds me of something that a young man who's romantically interested in Lily Bart says to her. So anyway, this is my favorite passage. What you do still better is what is done. When you speak sweet, I'd have you do it ever. When you sing, I'd have you buy and sell so give alms, pray so, and for the ordering your affairs, to sing them too. When you do dance, I wish you a wave of the sea, that you might ever do nothing but that. Move still, still so, and own no other function. Each your doing, so singular in each particular, crowns what you are doing in the present deeds, that all your acts are queens. So,
Yeah, that is nice.
yeah. So yeah, they were my favorite part of the Bohemia scenes, definitely. But
yeah, the other people around them, I agree with you. I was like, I don't understand what you're doing or saying. Or
yeah, Autolycus was the character I like struggled with the most. I was like, okay, so this guy is like some kind of a thief. He's swindling people by selling these, crappy goods to them or something. But then he also, I guess, accidentally helps to resolve the dramatic action by he accidentally helps resolve the conflict by telling someone something.
Well, he takes the shepherd and the shepherd's son with their box that, that essentially Perdita came with as a child. He takes them to Polixenes, right, and shows them to the boat, et cetera, right, and so he's instrumental in the revelation, I suppose, of who Perdita really is and what have you. I think Autolycus is funny. I love that he's got that speech where he he's essentially whining about how, oh man, if Polixenes hadn't showed up in this disguise and ruined all, like, I could have picked twice as many pockets as I picked or whatever, I mean, he's just always thinking about himself. He's always thinking about how to he's a little bit like the Niffler in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Like he's constantly looking to stuff gold in his pockets, right? He's like this magical platypus wandering around, listening for jewels falling and whatnot. So I think he's kind of a funny character.
Yeah.
My favorite line in the play is, and I love it. I feel like it's really epigrammatic. Actually, I wonder if it's ever actually been used as an epigram or an epigraph in a book. Did I mark it? I don't think I did. But it's when it's the little boy, was it Mamilius?
Yeah.
Mamilius?
No. Mamilius.
He says he's got this wonderful line. He says, "Sad stories are best for this time of year. Or sad stories are best for the winter."
Yeah.
And it's just a really wonderful standalone line. And one of the things I love about it too is that it's kind of sets the stage for joy. It sets the stage for happiness, right? So that when we get that pivot into the second half of the play, if we remember that line of his and we recognize that we're now in the spring with the lambing, et cetera, it primes us for a happy ending. It primes us for joy.
So the line, I actually found it. It's a sad tale's best for winter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What I love about that exchange there, so he says, sad tales best for winter. I have one of sprites and goblins. And then Hermione tells him to tell the story. And then Mamilius says, there was a man, and then he's interrupted. And Hermione tells him to come sit down. And then Mamilius says, so he continues from what he said before. He says, dwelt by a churchyard. And I think that's interesting because a churchyard is obviously where a graveyard is. And I think there's something really kind of moving about that imagery, coming for one thing from a very young boy, but also coming, just before the story we're about to see,
Well, and coming just before that very young boy dies himself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm bad, and I never mark any kind of quotes or anything. That's one of my goals for 2022 is to be better about like actually marking my favorite passages of things.
Well, I tend to underline, and sometimes I will dog ear a page that has a good quote, but what I wish I could do is keep a commonplace book where I actually wrote things down. I think I would remember stuff better if I did.
Yeah.
And then rather than having to like come through and be like, okay, where is that quote? I could just go to the document, control F search for the Winter's Tale, and I would find, Winter's Tale's best, or a Sad Tale's best for winter or something.
Yeah, commonplace book is I started keeping one years and years and years ago, and and it's in a Word document, and I think as a Word document, and all the passages, all the stuff that I've transcribed is all single spaced within a double space between each one. But I think it's like 50 pages long of stuff that I've transcribed over the years. And it does really aid in memory as well of the text. So speaking of parts that we mark, right, et cetera, et cetera, I this may just be me. This may be, I won't say wishful thinking. I may be finding something, I suppose, that isn't there. But reading it, was Act 1, Scene 2, lines 138 to 140. So this is Leontes, and he says, thy intention stabs the center. Thou dost make possible things not so held. Communicatest with dreams. How can this be? Those lines made me think of that Yeats poem. Is it The Second Coming? Right? About the center cannot hold, etc. Thy intention stabs the center. Thou dost make possible things not so held. And I don't know. And it made me wonder if Yeats just had those lines kind of floating around in his head, maybe even just unconsciously, and somehow worked those into his poem. But there's no way, probably no way to know.
Certainly, I think The Second Coming. It's a poem about sort of the destruction of an old world, but also sort of implied the creation of a new world afterward, to some degree. And it seems like The Winter's Tale is about that too. Sort of, you destroy an old world, create a new one. Like Jason mentioned, the cycle of death and renewal being a big thing, and seems thematically appropriate.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Cool to know.
You guys have made me want to start keeping a commonplace book now.
You should do it. Yeah,
I'm gonna do it.
I've often wanted to take my Word document and transcribe them by hand into an actual journal, but I've just never been able to bring myself to do it, man. That would be so much freaking work.
Well, just restart and do a new one.
The irony is that I kept a commonplace book for several months. But the reason that it was easier for me to keep a commonplace book back then was because I didn't actually read that much. So now that I read a lot more, I get to the end of a 300 or whatever page book, and I'm just like, oh my God, am I really going to go flip through, look at everything I underlined, and then type it all up? I always tell myself, oh, well, one of these days I'll have a Saturday afternoon where I'm like bored and don't have anything to do. So I'll just sit down and type away from my books, and it never happens. And I wish it did, because I remember the books that I do that with much better than any of the books I don't do that with. And I don't do it with 99.99999% of the books I read. So
I feel like I'm choosier about what I include these days than I used to be. And I'm not 100% sure why that is. Like I tab everything I read, I use my little tabs. And then when I finish a book, I'll go back through and look at the tabs. And it's funny, oftentimes I'll look at what I've tabbed and I can't remember why I tabbed it. I read the passage, I'm like, why the hell did I think this was important? And it's not striking me as a particularly beautiful line, so I didn't want to include it in the commonplace book. What did this have to do with anything? But so that's how I do it. Yes, I tab as I go through, and then when I'm done with the book, I just go back through those tabs and the ones, and essentially, if I'm not going to be talking about the book on BookTube or whatever, if I just was tabbing for myself, I'll just remove them and throw them away, unless it's something I want to keep in the commonplace book. And then I'll actually keep the tabs in the book until I get off my ass and actually transcribe them. into the document. And sometimes that takes a year. I'll pull a book off the shelf and it still has tabs. And I haven't touched the book in a year and a half, something like that. But yeah. Books are a cool thing.
I annotate my books. So sometimes I write comments in the margins. And sometimes I come back to reread a book and I see comments in the margins and I'm just like, what am I talking about? What?
Yeah. My problem is I listen to audiobooks a lot. So sometimes I'll have the physical book with me to, like, if there's something that's I want to particularly like actually look at, I'll have the physical book, but then it's way harder to remember quotes when you're just listening to it as you're doing other things, so I need to like pick specific books, and like Shakespeare would probably be a good one to like actually physically, because I have to look at that anyway. Even if I'm listening to it, I have to look at it. So that would probably be a good one to start with, to be like, okay, you actually want to remember this, so highlight it or something. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I never listen to audiobooks, because the couple of times that I have in the past, I get lost. I get lost and I lose track of where I am in the story or what's going on, and then all of a sudden I'll realize, well, what the hell is that? Like, what are you talking about? I don't know what they're talking about. And when that happens when I'm reading, then I can just scan back over the last couple of pages, and I'll seize on 3 or 4 details or sentences that I see, and I'm able to just kind of instantly cobble together what's happened in my head and then just move forward. But with audiobooks, I just feel utterly lost sometimes.
It took me a little while to train my brain to get there, but because at first I was like, I can't focus on these audiobooks, and sometimes I still can't, and then I have to stop listening to the audiobook and pick it up physically. But if I'm just sitting there knitting or doing some kind of a craft, that's a good time for audiobooks, because my brain's not really doing anything else.
Yeah, the last time I used an audiobook was when I was really struggling to get through the last chapter of Ulysses. That's the chapter that's all just like, it's just one big paragraph, no punctuation, no anything.
God.
And
I never knew that about this. That makes me want to read it even less.
And the only way I could get through it was to turn on an audiobook and read. I read along with the audiobook reader. And that way I was able to get through it in one evening. Whereas I think if I had tried to just read it myself, it would have taken either I would have taken like a month to read like one page at a time, or I would have like skimmed it in one evening and not remembered a thing. So yeah, I was glad. That's the one thing that I see myself using audiobooks for, to make sure that I actually read and not, because I don't like reading a book and then feeling like, I'm not gonna remember it because I skimmed it or something. But
that's why I like them with Shakespeare, because the language can be difficult. So it's nice to have the play there to look at, and and hear somebody else say it, because obviously, hopefully they know what they're saying if they're performing it. So
well, I find even just reading Shakespeare aloud myself, like Kelly will sometimes have me read it to her as she's trying to fall asleep at night, and reading it aloud, I find I understand what I'm reading when I read it aloud better than when I read it silently. Even without, and when you're reading it aloud, you don't even go to footnotes at all, right? Because you can't, because you're essentially dramatizing it, and so even without the footnotes, or I guess what I'm saying is, reading it aloud, I understand it better than I do silently with the footnotes, which is, I don't know, strange. Yeah, it's just a strange thing, but our brains are mysterious organs. That's for sure.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Well, do we have anything else about The Winter's Tale?
I don't think so.
I'm good.
Yeah, it's everybody. It's a play that if you haven't read it before, you should really give it a shot, because it's doing complicated things, and it's worth your time.
Underappreciated.
Yeah.
That's,
And like
yeah.
Josh said, it's a better play about jealousy than Othello.
Yeah, definitely. Well, anyway, this concludes ShakeTember for 2021, which is bittersweet, but this was a lot of fun. Talking each week, and so anyway, hopefully we'll be back next year. We don't know what format exactly, but we'll be back hopefully.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you everyone who made it to this point, and thank you once again, Jason and Rainey, for co-hosting.
Yeah, thanks for
You're
having me.
welcome.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.